I am Sherry, 54 years old, and for 3 decades I believed my marriage was the foundation of my life. Then at our family dinner, my husband Douglas did the unthinkable. He spat in my face while his mother and sister watched and actually applauded his behavior. I wiped my face and walked away without a word. They thought I was broken. They were wrong. Before I tell you how I found the strength to walk away and what happened 5 minutes later, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone expected you to break. I met Douglas when I was 22, a bright-eyed education major with dreams of shaping young minds. He was 24 in law school, ambitious and charming. We met at a university fundraiser where I was volunteering. Douglas approached me with confidence, complimenting my volunteer pin and asking thoughtful questions about my teaching aspirations. His interest seemed genuine, and I was immediately drawn to his intelligence and drive. Our courtship was quick by most standards. Within 6 months, we were engaged, and 6 months after that, we were married in a modest ceremony with family and friends. My parents, both teachers themselves, were cautiously supportive. My father took me aside the night before the wedding and said, "Sherry, make sure you keep your own identity in this marriage." I smiled and nodded, not fully understanding the weight of his words until many years later. The early years were filled with promise. I secured my first teaching position at an elementary school while Douglas finished law school. We lived in a tiny apartment, saving every penny we could. When Douglas landed his first position at a prestigious law firm in Connecticut, we moved from our hometown in Massachusetts, leaving behind my family and childhood friends. I transferred my teaching credentials and found a position at a local elementary school. As the years passed, our trajectories diverged. Douglas climbed the corporate ladder, rapidly making partner by 35. His salary increased dramatically, and so did his working hours and stress levels. I remained dedicated to my third-grade classroom, finding joy in my students' growth and learning. The shift in our power dynamic was subtle at first. Small comments about my modest teacher's salary compared to his growing wealth. Decisions about our home vacations and investments increasingly became his domain. By our 10th anniversary, we had moved into a beautiful colonial home in an exclusive neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. The 5-bedroom house with its manicured lawn was a physical manifestation of Douglas's success. We had 2 children by then. Andrew came first when we were 27, and Megan followed 2 years later. I reduced my teaching hours temporarily when they were young, but never gave up my career entirely. It was around this time that I began to see more clearly the dynamics between Douglas and his family, particularly his mother Pauline and his sister Barbara. Pauline, a widow since Douglas was in high school, had placed all her hopes and ambitions on her son. She was a formidable woman from old money who believed her son deserved nothing but the best, and unfortunately, in her eyes, I never quite measured up. Barbara, Douglas's older sister by 2 years, had married into wealth and spent most of her time maintaining her social status. She viewed me with a mixture of condescension and competition, always comparing our homes, our children's achievements, and our husbands' careers. The microaggressions began early. Pauline would visit and rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking. "This is how proper homes are organized, dear," she would say with a thin smile. Barbara would bring expensive gifts for the children and then comment on how it must be nice for them to have quality things. Douglas never defended me. In fact, he often agreed with them, suggesting I could learn from their refinement. I tried desperately to win their approval. I hosted elaborate holiday dinners, joined the charities Pauline deemed acceptable, enrolled our children in the private schools Barbara's children attended. Nothing was ever enough. At family gatherings, I was often talked over or dismissed. My teaching stories were met with polite disinterest, while Douglas's legal anecdotes received rapt attention. As the years went on, I became increasingly isolated. My own family was hours away, and maintaining friendships became difficult, as most of our socializing centered around Douglas's colleagues and clients. My identity slowly eroded, becoming more Douglas's wife than Sherry. Last year, after 30 years of teaching, I retired. My classroom had been my sanctuary, a place where I was valued and respected. Without it, I felt adrift. Douglas's response to my retirement was telling. Well, now you can finally focus on being a proper wife and taking care of the house, he said, as if my 3 decades of educating children had been a hobby rather than a career. Our children were now adults with their own lives. Andrew, 32, had followed his father into law and worked at a firm in Boston. Megan, 30, was a marketing executive in New York. They visited occasionally, but were busy with their careers. Without my students, and with empty nest syndrome hitting hard, I found myself questioning everything about my life and marriage. Douglas had become increasingly distant and critical. Nothing I did seemed right anymore. The warmth that had once existed between us had cooled to a formal politeness, at best open contempt at worst. Still, I held on to hope that things would improve. After all, we had 32 years of history together. Surely that counted for something. The annual family dinner to celebrate Douglas's achievements had become something of a tradition. This year, it was to honor his promotion to senior partner at his firm. As always, Pauline and Barbara were invited, and as always, I spent days preparing to ensure everything would be perfect. I chose his favorite menu, prime rib with roasted potatoes and asparagus. I polished the silverware that had belonged to his grandmother. I arranged fresh flowers throughout the house. I even wore the pearl necklace Douglas had given me for our 25th anniversary, hoping to recapture some of the connection we once shared. The day of the dinner, I was up at 6 in the morning, finalizing preparations. I baked fresh bread, prepared a salad with ingredients from the farmer's market, and made Douglas's favorite chocolate souffle for dessert. By the time I showered and dressed in my navy blue dress, purchased specifically for the occasion, my feet were already aching. Pauline arrived first at exactly 6 o'clock, stepping into our home like she was conducting an inspection. At 78, she remained elegant and intimidating, dressed in a designer suit with her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She handed me her coat without making eye contact. "The hydrangeas in the front need pruning, Sherry," were her first words to me. "And is that a water stain on the ceiling in the foyer? Douglas worked so hard to provide this beautiful home. It really should be maintained properly." I swallowed my retort and simply smiled. "Thank you for noticing, Pauline. Would you like a glass of the Chardonnay Douglas picked out?" Before she could answer, Barbara swept in with her husband Thomas trailing behind her. Barbara, at 56, worked hard to maintain her youthful appearance with obvious cosmetic work and a rigidly maintained figure. "Sherry, you look exhausted," she announced, air kissing my cheeks. "I can recommend my facialist. She works wonders for women our age." She emphasized our age, though she was only 2 years younger than me. Thomas nodded politely in my direction before gravitating toward the bar cart where Douglas was pouring drinks. "The house looks acceptable," Pauline said, inspecting the dining room, "though I still think the drapes we saw at the design center would have been more appropriate than these." "Mom is right," Barbara added. "These look a bit teacher budget." They both laughed, as if sharing an inside joke. Douglas entered the room looking handsome in his tailored suit, but there was a coldness in his eyes I had grown accustomed to seeing. "Is dinner ready? Thomas and I are discussing the Westfield acquisition, and I want to finish before we eat." 20 more minutes, I said. "The souffle needs a bit more time." Pauline clicked her tongue. Proper planning would have had everything ready precisely at arrival time. I excused myself to check on dinner, needing a moment alone in the kitchen. As I adjusted the temperature on the oven, I heard my phone buzz from where I had left it on the counter. Thinking it might be one of the children calling to wish their father congratulations, I picked it up. It wasn't the children. It was a text message notification on Douglas's account, which sometimes synced with mine due to our family sharing plan. The preview showed enough for my heart to stop. "Missing you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait until she's out of the picture." The message was from someone named Veronica, his new legal assistant. I stood frozen, staring at those words that confirmed what I had suspected but pushed aside for months. The subtle late nights, the new cologne, the increased criticism of everything I did. I took a deep breath and decided to get through the dinner. Making a scene now would only play into their narrative of me as emotional and unstable. I would address it later privately with Douglas. With trembling hands, I finished preparing dinner and called everyone to the table. Throughout the meal, tension built inside me like a pressure cooker. Douglas dominated the conversation with talk of his promotion and the new cases he would be handling. Pauline beamed with pride, and Barbara peppered him with questions that allowed him to further boast about his accomplishments. "And how are you filling your days now, Sherry?" Pauline asked during a lull in conversation, her tone suggesting my days must be empty without purpose. "I've been volunteering at the Literacy Center," I replied, "and I'm considering consulting for educational publishers." "At your age, shouldn't you be focusing on supporting Douglas?" Barbara interjected. "His career is at such a crucial point." "Sherry has plenty of time on her hands now," Douglas said dismissively, "though the house could use more attention than it gets." I felt something shift inside me. 32 years of diminishment and dismissal crystallized in that moment. The text message from Veronica flashed in my mind. I looked at Douglas, really looked at him, and saw not the man I had fallen in love with, but a stranger whose approval I had been desperately seeking for decades. It was then I noticed how similar his expression was to Pauline's. The same entitled contempt. It had always been there, but I had chosen not to see it. As Barbara launched into a story about her recent renovation, I felt myself reaching a breaking point. Years of silenced thoughts pushed against my lips, demanding release. Dinner continued with the usual pattern. Douglas, Pauline, and Barbara exchanged stories that subtly highlighted my inadequacies, while Thomas occasionally nodded in agreement. I maintained my composure, cutting my prime rib into perfectly even pieces as the conversation turned to finances. "Douglas tells me you've been looking at investment properties in the Hamptons," Pauline said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "A wise move. Real estate is the only sensible investment for someone of your standing." "We're considering it," Douglas replied, emphasizing the we, while glancing dismissively at me. "Now that Sherry's not bringing in her teacher's salary, we need to be more strategic with our investments." The comment stung. My salary had never been substantial compared to his, but it had been steady and had contributed to our children's college funds and our retirement accounts. More importantly, it had been earned through work I was proud of. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice even, "my pension is quite reasonable, and I have my own savings. I contributed to our financial security for 30 years. Pauline laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, Sherry, a teacher's pension. How quaint. Douglas probably spends more on his quarterly taxes than you earned in a year." "Mom's right," Barbara chimed in. "It's sweet that you think your little salary made a difference." I looked to Douglas, hoping for once he might acknowledge my contributions. Instead, he smirked and raised his wine glass. "Let's be honest, Sherry. Your financial contribution was symbolic at best. I've always been the provider in this family." The dismissal of my entire career of decades of hard work hit me like a physical blow. Combined with the text I had seen earlier, something inside me finally broke free. "Is that what you tell Veronica?" I asked quietly. The table went silent. Douglas's hand froze midair, his wine glass suspended between the table and his lips. "What did you say?" His voice had dropped dangerously low. "Veronica, your legal assistant, the one who thought last night was incredible, the one who can't wait until I'm out of the picture." My voice remained calm, but my heart was racing. "Does she know about your financial prowess too?" Douglas's face flushed red. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, his eyes darting between his mother and sister, then back to me. Then his expression hardened. "You've been going through my phone, invading my privacy." His voice rose with each word. "This is exactly why I've had to look elsewhere. Your constant suspicion, your neediness, your failure to understand the pressures I'm under." "Douglas," I said, still maintaining my composure, The message synced to my phone. I wasn't looking for it. But now that we're talking about it, is it true? Are you planning to leave me for her? Instead of answering, Douglas's face contorted with rage. Before I could react, he leaned across the table and spat directly in my face. Warm saliva hit my cheek and dripped down to my chin. The shock of it rendered me speechless. The room went utterly still for a beat. Then, to my horror, Pauline actually clapped her hands together, two sharp, approving cracks in the silence. "Finally," she said, putting her in her place after all these years. Barbara joined in with her own applause, adding, "It's about time she learned her role." Thomas looked uncomfortable but said nothing, his eyes fixed on his plate. I sat motionless, the spit cooling on my face, as the full reality of my situation crystallized with perfect clarity. This was my family. These were the people I had spent over 3 decades trying to please. My husband had just spat on me, and his family was applauding. In that moment, I felt a strange calm descend over me. With deliberate movements, I picked up my napkin and wiped my face. Then I stood my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the now quiet room. Without a word, without tears, without the emotional breakdown they clearly expected, I simply walked away. I heard Barbara whisper, dramatic as usual, as I left, but it no longer had the power to hurt me. I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in 32 years, I saw my marriage with complete clarity. Sitting on the edge of the bed I had shared with Douglas for decades, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt a surprising calm, as if a fig had finally lifted. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. It was as if some essential part of me long suppressed had awakened and taken control. Memories flashed through my mind, moments I had dismissed or rationalized over the years. Douglas, forgetting to mention me when he accepted an award at a firm dinner. Pauline rearranging our wedding photos to minimize my presence. Barbara making cutting remarks about my appearance at family gatherings, while Douglas laughed along. The pattern was so clear now, the slow erosion of my confidence and identity so deliberate, that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. Love could explain some of it, but not all. I had been complicit in my own diminishment, believing somehow that if I just tried harder, was more understanding, more accommodating, I would finally be accepted and valued. The sound of laughter drifted up from the dining room. They were carrying on without me, probably dissecting my behavior, framing my departure as further proof of my inadequacy. For the first time, I truly did not care what they thought of me. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would understand and help without judgment, my older brother, James. He had never liked Douglas, had seen through him from the beginning. I had dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness, another mistake to add to my growing list. James answered on the second ring. "Sherry, everything okay?" "No," I said simply. "Douglas just spat in my face at dinner." His mother and sister applauded. There was a beat of silence, then James's voice tight with controlled anger. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack a bag. You're not spending another night in that house." "James, it's a 2-hour drive from Boston. I'm actually in Greenwich for a case. Don't argue. Just pack what you need for tonight. I'll handle the rest." I knew that tone. It was the same one he had used when defending me against neighborhood bullies as a child. James was not just my brother. He was a high-powered attorney, known for his aggressive litigation style, particularly in divorce cases. I hadn't called him with divorce in mind, but as I hung up and began to pack an overnight bag, I knew that's where this was heading. True to his word, James arrived exactly 20 minutes later. I heard the commotion downstairs, the doorbell ringing insistently, followed by raised voices. I zipped my bag closed and walked down the stairs to find a scene I could never have imagined. James stood in our foyer, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were 2 uniformed security personnel and a woman in a sharp suit holding a briefcase. Douglas was red-faced and gesturing angrily, while Pauline and Barbara looked on in shock. "You can't just barge in here," Douglas was shouting. "This is my house. Actually, James replied coolly. This house is jointly owned according to Connecticut property records. My sister has every right to invite guests, including her legal counsel. He spotted me on the stairs, and his expression softened. Ready to go, Sherry? What is the meaning of this? Pauline demanded, stepping forward. We were having a family dinner before Sherry created this unnecessary drama. Family dinner. James's voice was ice cold. Is it normal in your family to spit on someone's face and applaud it? Because in mine we call that assault. This is ridiculous, Barbara interjected. It was just a little disagreement that got heated. Sherry's blowing it out of proportion as usual. James ignored her and turned to the woman with the briefcase. Sandra, please provide Mr. Patterson with the preliminary documentation while I help my sister with her bag. Sandra nodded and approached Douglas, extending a thick envelope. Mr. Patterson, this is a temporary restraining order based on tonight's assault, along with preliminary divorce filings. You'll find all the relevant details inside. Douglas's face went from red to ashen. Divorce restraining order, Sherry, you can't be serious. It was a momentary loss of temper. You provoked me with your accusations. Accusations that appear to be true, James interjected, based on the evidence we've already gathered. Evidence? What evidence? Douglas sputtered. James smiled grimly. Let's just say that when certain financial discrepancies were brought to our attention by a concerned party at your firm last month, we began looking more closely at your recent activities. This was news to me. I looked at James questioningly, but he simply shook his head slightly, a signal we would discuss it later. This is preposterous, Pauline exclaimed. Douglas has done nothing wrong. Sherry should be grateful for everything he's provided. Mrs. Patterson, Sandra said, turning to Pauline, I suggest you and Miss Whitfield leave the premises immediately. The restraining order extends to family members who were present during and supportive of the assault. You can't make us leave, Barbara protested. Actually, we can, one of the security personnel stated calmly. We're authorized to escort you out if necessary. The reality of the situation finally seemed to dawn on Douglas. His lawyer persona emerged as he straightened his tie and attempted to regain composure. This is an obvious ambush. Any decent judge will throw this out. You have no real evidence of anything. James walked up the stairs and took my bag. We have evidence of financial impropriety, infidelity, and now physical assault with witnesses. Would you like to test how that plays out in court, Douglas? Because I've been waiting 32 years to take you down, and I've got enough to bury you 10 times over. The house that had never truly felt like my home suddenly felt different. For once, I wasn't the one being intimidated in these rooms. I descended the stairs, slowly aware of all eyes on me. Sherry, Douglas said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, we can work this out. You're upset, understandably, but 32 years of marriage shouldn't end over one regrettable incident. I looked at the man I had spent most of my life with and felt nothing but pity. It's not ending because of one incident, Douglas. It's ending because of thousands of small cruelties that led to this moment. I turned to Pauline and Barbara, and you two were accomplices every step of the way. As James led me toward the door, Douglas made one last desperate attempt. What about everything I've given you? This house, the vacations, the lifestyle you'd have nothing without me. I paused at the threshold and looked back at him. I gave you 32 years of my life, Douglas. I raised your children. I supported your career. I tried to please your family. And in return, you gave me material things while taking my dignity. I think I'll manage just fine without your kind of giving. As we stepped outside, I heard Barbara asking Douglas what he was going to do. For the first time in decades, his answer was no longer my concern. The first night away from my home of 20 years was spent in James's hotel suite. He had been in Greenwich representing a client in a corporate dispute, a coincidence that now seemed like fate. After ensuring I was comfortable, James sat me down for a conversation that would reveal just how little I knew about my husband's activities. Sherry, I need to tell you something, and it's not going to be easy to hear. James's expression was grave as he spread several documents on the coffee table between us. About a month ago, I was contacted by someone from Douglas's firm, a junior partner named Michael Harrington. The name was familiar. He came to our Christmas party last year. James nodded. Michael reached out because he discovered some concerning transactions while working on a case with Douglas. Funds being moved to offshore accounts, inconsistencies in client billing. When he confronted Douglas, he was threatened with termination. Are you saying Douglas was embezzling from the firm? The concept seemed impossible to reconcile with the man who had lectured our children about integrity. Not just from the firm, from you. James slid a document toward me. It was a bank statement for an account I had never seen before in Douglas's name, only with a balance that made my breath catch. He's been diverting substantial portions of his income to hidden accounts for at least 3 years. Based on the timing and other evidence, we believe he's been planning to leave you. For Veronica? I said softly, the text message from earlier flashing in my mind. Yes, but he wanted to ensure you got as little as possible in the divorce. He's been systematically devaluing shared assets while building his separate estate. James's expression was a mixture of anger and sadness. I'm sorry, Sherry. I should have looked into him years ago when I first had suspicions. You tried to warn me. I wouldn't listen. I picked up one of the statements noting transactions for jewelry and travel that had never been shared with me. What happens now? Now we fight. Sandra is one of the best divorce attorneys in New England. With the financial evidence and the assault, we have a strong case for an extremely favorable settlement. James's face softened. But first, you need somewhere safe to stay while this plays out. The next morning, I moved into James's guest house in Boston. It was a peaceful cottage behind his Victorian home with a garden view and privacy I desperately needed. The days that followed brought a whirlwind of legal meetings, phone calls from concerned friends who had heard rumors, and eventually calls from my children. Andrew called first, his voice tight with confusion. Mom, Dad says you've lost your mind, that you're making wild accusations and trying to ruin him. What's going on? I told him everything from the years of emotional abuse to the final incident at dinner. He was silent for a long moment. I don't know what to believe, he finally said. Dad's always been tough, but he's not the monster you're describing. I understand your confusion, Andrew. I'm not asking you to choose sides. Just keep an open mind as things unfold. It hurt that he doubted me, but I understood. Douglas had always cultivated a special bond with our son, presenting himself as the model of male success. Megan's call was entirely different. Mom, are you okay? I've been so worried about you. Her voice was thick with emotion. I always knew there was something wrong with how Dad and Grandma treated you, but I never thought it would come to this. You knew? I was surprised by her perception. Of course I knew. Why do you think I moved to New York right after college instead of coming back to Greenwich? Being around them was suffocating. She paused. Dad called me with his version, but I didn't believe a word of it. I'm coming to Boston this weekend. I want to see you. As the days turned into weeks, the full extent of Douglas's betrayal became clearer. The financial investigation revealed years of hidden accounts, suspicious cash withdrawals, and even a condominium purchased in Veronica's name. His affair had been going on for over 2 years. Most shocking was the discovery that Douglas had been manipulating our children's perception of me for years. Andrew found emails where Douglas had deliberately misrepresented conversations with me, painting me as irrational and unstable. This discovery was what finally convinced Andrew that his father was not the man he had believed him to be. Meanwhile, Pauline launched a campaign to turn extended family against me. She called cousins, family, friends, even my former colleagues, spreading stories about my mental breakdown and vicious accusations. Some believed her, but many saw through the desperation in her efforts. Barbara was equally busy in our social circle hosting lunches, where she whispered about my jealousy and inability to accept Douglas's success. What she didn't anticipate was that several of these women had experienced their own versions of dismissal and disrespect from Douglas, Pauline, and Barbara, over the years. Rather than turning against me, they reached out with support and their own stories. Through it all, I was surprised by my own resilience. Without the constant undermining of my confidence, I began to recognize the emotional abuse I had normalized for decades. Sessions with a therapist helped me understand how gradually my boundaries and sense of self had been eroded in my marriage. Most surprisingly, I discovered I wasn't financially dependent on Douglas after all. My teacher's pension was reliable, my personal savings more substantial than I had been led to believe, and with James's help, I began to understand that I was entitled to a significant portion of our marital assets, regardless of Douglas's attempts to hide them. For the first time in decades, I made decisions without considering Douglas's approval. I bought clothes I liked rather than what he deemed appropriate. I reconnected with old friends he had dismissed as beneath our social standing. I enrolled in an art class I had always wanted to take, but had been told was a waste of time. Each small act of independence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost, and with each passing day, the woman I had been before Douglas began to reemerge stronger and wiser than before. 6 months after the night Douglas spat in my face, the world looked entirely different. The divorce proceedings had revealed even more about the man I had married and the life we had built on shifting sand. Douglas's professional standing had been severely damaged when the financial improprieties at his firm came to light during the discovery phase of our divorce. Several clients had withdrawn their business, and the partners had called an emergency meeting to discuss his future with the firm. His carefully cultivated image of success and integrity was crumbling under scrutiny. Ironically, it was during this professional crisis that Pauline suffered a minor stroke. At 78, her health had been relatively good, but the stress of the public scandal and potential downfall of her beloved son proved too much. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks, and to everyone's shock, Douglas was too consumed with his own legal troubles to visit her more than twice. It was Barbara who called me, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Sherry, mother is asking for you," she said, sounding exhausted. "I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider visiting her? The doctors say familiar faces might help her recovery." "Why would she want to see me, Barbara? The last time we were together, she applauded when Douglas spat in my face." There was a long pause. "She regrets that. We both do." Another pause. "Douglas hasn't been to see her in days. He's too busy with his legal problems and that woman." That woman. Veronica. The affair that Douglas had initially denied was now conducted openly, a final insult in a long line of betrayals. According to my attorney, they had moved into the condominium together, leaving our marital home empty and neglected. After some consideration, I agreed to visit Pauline. Not for her sake or Barbara's, but for my own. I needed to face the woman who had enabled and encouraged the worst in her son, the woman whose approval I had foolishly sought for decades. The hospital room was dim when I entered, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Pauline looked smaller, somehow diminished in the hospital bed. Barbara sat beside her, looking up with surprise when I actually appeared. "You came?" she said simply. I said I would. I approached the bed cautiously. Pauline's eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with effort. "Sherry," she said, her voice weak but still carrying that imperious tone I knew so well. "You look different." I was different. 6 months of freedom from constant criticism had allowed me to rediscover my own style. My hair, once kept in the conservative bob Douglas preferred, now fell in natural waves past my shoulders. I wore a bright blue blouse rather than the muted colors that had dominated my wardrobe for years. "People change, Pauline." She gestured weakly for me to come closer. "Douglas is making a terrible mistake," she said, surprising me with her candor. "That girl is using him. Anyone can see it." I felt an unexpected surge of pity for her. Even now, her concern was for Douglas, for his mistake in choosing the wrong woman, rather than in how he had treated me. "That's between Douglas and Veronica now," I said gently. "I've moved on." "He would come back to you," Pauline said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. If you drop this ridiculous divorce, he needs stability now with the firm questioning him. And there it was, the real reason for the call for the sudden regret. Douglas was facing consequences, and I was meant to rescue him, to provide the supportive wife image he needed to rehabilitate his reputation. Pauline, I didn't come here to discuss reconciliation. That's not possible after everything that's happened. Families should stand together in difficult times, she insisted, her voice strengthening with familiar righteousness. Yes, they should, I agreed. But Douglas wasn't standing with me when you both were laughing at my humiliation. He wasn't standing with me when he was hiding assets and planning to leave me destitute. And he's not standing with you now that you're ill. Barbara shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sherry's right, Mother. Douglas has changed. Or maybe he was always this way, and we just didn't want to see it. This admission from Barbara was perhaps the most surprising development of the day. As we left the hospital together, she confided that her own marriage was unraveling. Thomas has been having an affair with his administrative assistant for 3 years. Her laugh was bitter. Like brother-in-law, I suppose. I'm sorry, Barbara. And I genuinely was. Despite our difficult relationship, I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. The thing is, she continued, not meeting my eyes, watching how you've handled everything with such dignity. It made me think, maybe I don't have to stay either. We parted with an awkward hug, the first genuine contact we'd had in decades. It wasn't forgiveness or friendship, but it was a moment of shared humanity that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Back in Boston, my new life continued to evolve. I had reconnected with my own family, spending holidays with James and his wife, visiting my sister in Chicago, rebuilding relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. My brother's home had become a sanctuary, but I was beginning to think about finding my own place, a space that would be truly mine. I had made new friends through my art class and volunteer work at a literacy program similar to the one I had started at in Greenwich. These friends knew me as I was now, not as Douglas's wife or as the woman who had been publicly humiliated. They valued my insights, laughed at my jokes, invited me to book clubs and hiking trips. Most surprisingly, I had met someone. Robert was a widower. I met while volunteering, a retired English professor with kind eyes and a quiet intelligence. Our friendship had developed slowly over coffee after our volunteer shifts. There was no rush, no pressure, just the gentle discovery of shared interests and values. When he asked me to dinner for the first time, I surprised myself by saying yes. The woman who had walked away from that dining room table 6 months ago couldn't have imagined dating again. But then she couldn't have imagined many of the changes that had transformed her life. Each decision I made now was mine alone, each step forward a choice rather than an obligation. There were still difficult days, still moments of doubt and grief for what had been lost, but they were outnumbered by days of discovery and growing confidence. I had learned that walking away wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the first step on a path that was finally truly my own. 2 years have passed since that pivotal night when I walked away from my husband of 32 years. Sitting in my sunlit condo overlooking Boston Harbor, I sometimes marvel at how completely life can transform when you finally stand up for yourself. The legal battle with Douglas was lengthy and bitter, but ultimately successful. His attempts to hide assets backfired spectacularly when the judge assigned to our case took a particularly dim view of his financial deceptions. The final settlement provided me with financial security that Douglas had never intended me to have, including half of all marital assets, a significant portion of his retirement accounts, and alimony that reflected the length of our marriage and my contributions to his career. Douglas's professional downfall continued as more improprieties came to light. He was eventually asked to resign from his firm to avoid a public scandal, a humiliation that hit him harder than the divorce itself. His identity had been so thoroughly wrapped up in his professional success that losing his position devastated him in ways I recognized all too well. When your worth has been defined by external validation for decades, losing that validation feels like losing yourself. Veronica left shortly after his resignation, moving on to a partner at a competing firm. According to Andrew, Douglas was genuinely shocked by her departure, having believed their relationship was based on love rather than opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me, though. I took no pleasure in his pain. Pauline recovered physically from her stroke, but the experience changed her. During her recovery, she had time to reflect on her role in enabling her son's worst behaviors. While we would never be close, our relationship shifted to one of mutual respect. At 80, she had finally begun to recognize that her devotion to Douglas had ultimately harmed him as much as it had hurt others. Barbara's story took a more surprising turn. After our conversation at the hospital, she began therapy to address her own unhappiness. 6 months later, she filed for divorce from Thomas. Now, at 58, she's running a small art gallery in Providence, living alone for the first time in her adult life, and by her own account, finally discovering who she is beyond her roles as Douglas's sister Thomas's wife and Pauline's daughter. My relationships with my children have evolved in ways I never expected. Andrew initially struggled with the revelations about his father, having modeled much of his own behavior on Douglas's example. Our reconciliation came gradually through honest conversations about the reality of my marriage and his childhood experiences. "I think I always knew something was wrong," he admitted during a weekend visit to my condo. "There were times I saw Dad belittle you, and I didn't say anything. I thought that's just how marriages worked." "We all normalized it," I told him. "That's what happens with long-term emotional abuse. It becomes your normal." "I'm trying to be different," he said. "In my work and my relationships, I don't want to be him." That admission and the effort he's making to examine his inherited behaviors has brought us closer than we've been since he was a child. Megan has become my strongest supporter and closest friend among my family members. She visits often from New York, sometimes bringing her girlfriend Jasmine, a relationship she had kept secret during the last years of my marriage, knowing Douglas would disapprove. "I was planning to tell you after I was sure about Jasmine," she explained, "but I knew telling you meant Dad would find out, and I just wasn't ready for that battle." The realization that my children had been hiding important parts of themselves from their father saddened me, but it also validated my decision to leave. By breaking free, I had created space for more honesty in all our relationships. My own journey of rediscovery has been the most surprising aspect of these 2 years. I've learned that identity isn't static, that even at 56, I could reinvent myself, not as someone new, but as the person I might have been without the constraints of my marriage. My condo reflects this evolution. Unlike the formal, designer-decorated home I shared with Douglas, my space is filled with books, art from local galleries, comfortable furniture, and plants that thrive in the abundant natural light. Every item has been chosen by me, for me, a physical manifestation of my reclaimed autonomy. My relationship with Robert has deepened over time. At 62, he brings a lifetime of experience and his own hard-won wisdom to our connection. We travel together, occasionally share our respective passions, and enjoy the simple pleasure of companionship without demands or power struggles. Whether this relationship lasts another month or many years, it has taught me what equal partnership feels like. Looking back on that night when Douglas spat in my face and his family applauded, I now recognize it as a gift, the moment when the illusion I had lived in for decades shattered completely. The public humiliation that should have broken me instead freed me, forcing me to see what I had been unwilling to acknowledge for years. The journey hasn't been easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, questioning my decisions and mourning the life I thought I had. There were moments of fear about my future, about whether I could truly stand on my own after decades of being Douglas's wife. There were painful revelations and difficult conversations with family and friends. But through it all, I discovered that true dignity isn't about never falling down. It's about how you choose to stand back up. It's about recognizing your own worth when others have failed to value you. It's about walking away from situations that diminish you, even when staying seems easier. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stayed that night, if I had wiped my face and continued with dinner as if nothing had happened? How many more years would I have lost to a marriage that took far more than it gave? How much smaller would my world have remained? Instead, I walked away and discovered that endings can be beginnings, that it's never too late to reclaim your life, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply to leave it behind and build something better. As I write this, from my desk overlooking the harbor, watching boats navigate the currents, I'm reminded that life, like the water below, is constantly in motion. The next chapter of my story is still being written, and for the first time in decades, I'm the one holding the pen. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would be in your life forever? How did you find the strength to start over? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to follow your own path to happiness, whatever that looks like for you.